You are regarded as the father of functional medicine. And I'd love to start us off here today with maybe you having us define or describe what is functional medicine and how does that maybe differ from your traditional, Western type of medicine?
The functional medicine model for me kind of grew up over many, many years of being influenced by all sorts of extraordinary individuals, probably starting with my father and my mother to an extent as well. Then I was very fortunate to meet mentors that took me under their wings kind of over the years, a couple of Nobel Prize winners that I had the privilege of working for, one of who was in my undergraduate work at the University of California, Irvine back in the 60s. And then second was Dr. Linus Pauling, two-time Nobel Prize winning laureate from Stanford. And I worked under him in the 80s when I was a professor on sabbatical. So these individuals kind of grew my thinking about what I could do with my background and training. And I've always been very interested in the concept of why do people get sick? It's been really the driving force for me. And my mother would say, even going back into when I was very little, I was always asking those questions. And I think it's really important to know when a person is sick, but it may be even more important to ask how do they get sick and how do we do something to keep them from getting sick again, rather than just treating the effect, that maybe we ought to be looking at the cause. And so that begs the question, what is the cause? And really, there are two different uh, major, well, actually, probably three different major reasons why people get sick. One of which is a result of injuries and things that happen. As they say, life is what happens in between our plans, and all of us over the course of living have things happen to us that we just have to deal with. Um, and so injuries can be one. Second, is something we've all experienced, and that's infection. So communicable diseases, infectious disorders. And medicine is pretty good at managing those. Maybe we would say not so good with SARS-CoV-2, but historically we've been pretty good in managing bacterial illnesses, communicable illnesses. We have got a whole range of drugs called antibiotics that treat bacterial and fungal infections. We're not so many drugs for treating viral infections, but we've been pretty good in the side of infectious disease, particularly by using sanitation, hygiene, and nutrition. And I want to emphasize that it's interesting to note that the major advances in human longevity really have occurred as a consequence of lowering the incidence of life-threatening or life-extinguishing infectious disease. And people might claim credit that medicine has done this, but medicine really was laid on top of changes that occurred at the turn of the last century when we started introducing public health, sanitation, nutrition, and hygiene, taking the concept that there are bugs that could be in our air, water, or food that could create sickness, and that we needed to clean things up. And that really is probably the singular most advancing principle in human health and longevity, because we went from a mean average life expectancy of just slightly greater than 40 years at the turn of the last century to our mean average life expectancy being over 70 now. And the major reason for that was sanitation, nutrition, and hygiene improvements in our culture, not medicine. Now, medicine plays a role, so I don't want to discount the fact that we do have hospitals and medical therapies that are advantageous when we need them. Now, the third cause of illness is the one that has really only recently started to gain a lot of traction, and that is what we call metabolic disorders, conditions that fall under titles like diabetes, dementia, cancer, atherosclerosis or heart disease, arthritis, and other autoimmune diseases. These are not disorders that have been traditionally thought to be caused by an infection or by being exposed to a bug of some type. So the question is, where do they come from? If they're not a consequence of infectious disease, where do they come from? And that's been the question that for me has been probably the driving force in my professional, maybe even personal life for the last 7 decades, because it's the understanding of the origin of those that leads us to recognize that if we understand their origin, most of these are, I don't want to say completely preventable, but they're certainly to a great extent preventable, allowing a person to achieve their uh, potential, basically, their genetic potential. It's interesting when we talk about genetic potential, what does that mean? it means that within our genes, this extraordinary legacy we got from our biological parents that tells us not what we are, but tells us what we could be. I want to emphasize that again. Our genes don't tell us what we are, they tell us what we could be. And in our genes are captured the magic of us at our best, not just us at our worst, but us at our best. So, our life principle is to find out how to unleash the us is at our best out of our genes and quiet down the us of our least best so that it doesn't get a voice in who we are. And that is the question that I've been really dealing with, with many, many other people. I'm certainly one of just literally hundreds of thousands of different people that are worried about this question. And the answer to that is that many of the things that we do every day, things we're exposed to, how we live, how we eat, how we interact with other people, our thoughts, our attitudes, our beliefs, our behaviors, are those magic things that actually modulate how we're going to be from what our genes give us the potential to be. So, do we exercise? What foods do we eat? Do we sleep? Do we have good friends? Are we loved? Do we love? Do we have peace in our heart? Are we avoiding exposure to bad stuff? Bad stuff can be, someone said to me, you can have toxic thoughts just like you can have toxic chemicals. And so all these things then become part of the wellspring of factors that are modifiable and alterable if we understand how they influence our genes to create our health outcomes. And that has been then the, the conceptual framework for how I think our function as an individual is determined. And I break function down into four categories. Our function can be our physical function, and we all know about that: musculoskeletal function, flexibility, endurance, the way our muscles are structured relative to our ligaments and tendons and bones, and all that architecture is related to our function, and then how it gets powered up by the energy of our body. So that's physical function. Second is metabolic function. And metabolic function are all the kind of things that a lot of us who are in this field spend a lot of time studying: metabolism, how energy is converted into food, how the cells do their energy production process, how cells take energy from where they're produced to where they're needed, how it functions across all these organ systems. So that's our metabolic function, or some people would call it physiological function. The third is our cognitive function: how we think, how we see the world, how we transfer and transmit and process information. And cognitive function is a functional capability that we would say, well, that's all in the brain, isn't it? No, it's not just solely in the brain. Our cognitive function, we would say, resides principally in the brain, but there are many other sites in our body that regulate and transmit and control information. And then the fourth quadrant I call of function is our behavioral or psychological or spiritual, or however you want to see this function, however you want to call that. It's how we incorporate our experience of living into how we see the world and how we address the world and how we perform in the world, that behavioral function. Now, all four of those, if we think about them, roll up into our being, into our whole. They're not one separate, like today we don't just worry about physical function and tomorrow we're going to worry about metabolic function. We're doing it all the time, all four of these things. They all coincide to become us, to become who we are. And interestingly enough, all four of those functional characteristics are modifiable. You can, just like you can practice to be really good at a sport or good at a musical instrument or good at being an actor or an artist or whatever it would be, you can become good at each of those four things if you know what to practice. And those four things, what you practice is related to who you individually are in your genes. Not two people are identical. We are each unique facets on the diamond of life. There is never going to be a person exactly like us, and there never was in the past. We are uniqueness in the collection of human beings. And therefore, the expression of our uniqueness, at the full expression of all of our value proposition, is going to depend on how we unleash these functional characteristics: our physical, metabolic, cognitive, and behavioral function. And that's then the basis of functional medicine, saying let's focus less on what we call something. Let's focus more on how we squeeze out the best of our function. Because if we do, we won't worry so much about getting diseased, because we will be functioning at a very high level And the body has its recovery rehabilitative capabilities that if we give it the full things it needs, it can find a path to achieve very high levels of health. So that's basically the functional medicine model.
No, I love that. I love that so much, man. And I think this was one of the reasons why I was so excited about this conversation today, because your view, your perspective on health, on medicine, on life just runs so intertwined with the things that we believe here and try to, also how I try to live out and walk out my life as well. So I have a background in competitive bodybuilding. And obviously, a lot of people think bodybuilding is a physical thing, right? You got to go to the gym, train hard, and it's purely, I guess, maybe this first part of the function. But I can tell you, I really saw the greatest success when I really began to integrate all four of these. It's like when I understood the mental side of the game, like how to actually, while training, get my mind into these muscles. Obviously, there's still a physical part there as well, but even tying in some of the behavioral side of things, like the need for meditation, mindfulness, relaxation, like it's all kind of intertwined. And I think, your approach to medicine, your work as well, is so intertwined with the things that we're trying to do here. Summarizing this like in a single sentence, it sounds like functional medicine is a proactive approach to our health and our life, whereas a traditional Western type medicine is the reaction, right? You wait till you get sick, you seek out the doctor, he sees it through this little lens right here that he's been trained in to only see the world through one way. And he's like, okay, you have this, here's the solution. Whereas in the functional way, it's like we do our best to try to prevent these things from happening. That be kind of an accurate, just like single sentence to kind of sum it up?
Yeah, Frank, I think you've hit it. I think there's a part of this that everybody knows, and that is how do these concepts get executed upon in our society? What are the institutions, the devices, the procedures, the policies, programs by which these concepts, these big concepts that we're describing, get implemented in people's lives? And our model today that we call healthcare, I think we would both, you and I would agree, and probably most of your viewers would agree, is a disease care system. It's a very, very sophisticated and very capable disease care system. So I don't want to paint it as being something bad. It's quite good. But we call it a healthcare system. It's actually not a healthcare system. It is a disease care system. Now, the assumption has been that if you don't have a disease, you're healthy. So the concept is the absence of disease is the definition of health. I think any human being that's lived in this planet for a certain number of years and has gone through the experience of life would say, no, hold it. Health and the absence of disease are not exactly the same things. I can have days where I am not diseased, but I don't feel healthy. I feel low energy. I feel depressed. I feel sick. I feel uh, incapable of doing what I need to do. Um, those things are measurements of health at a different standard than just the absence of disease. And by the way, likewise, there are individuals that may have a disease, but actually feel quite healthy because they're living a fully expressed life. And they can live with some of this stuff because all the other things are so good. So the construct of health and disease to me needs to be re-explored. So what we are talking about in functional medicine is a model that really begs the question for each one of us, and that is how do we both aspire and then execute on the principle of health? Health, then, to me, is maximizing the capability in those functional areas, those four functional areas, to be fully capable of doing what we want to over the course of 100 years of living. I just chose 100 years because it's a nice round number. I think the human being is easily capable in its genes of living 100 year of healthy living with the proper practices and the proper procedures that we would execute upon.